boardroom smelled like expensive coffee and polished mahogany. Sarah Mitchell sat perfectly still in the leather chair, watching her husband of 8 years shuffle papers with the casual confidence of a man who'd already won. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind him, downtown Atlanta's skyline stretched toward a cloudless October sky. All glass and steel and the kind of money that made people forget their manners. David Chen, her husband, slid a Mont Blanc pen across the table like he was closing another sales deal instead of ending their marriage. His Patek Philippe watch caught the light, the same watch she'd given him for their 5th anniversary back when she still believed expensive gifts could fill the space growing between them. "Sign here," he said, his tone flat and businesslike, the voice he used with underperforming sales reps. Sarah's hands stayed folded in her lap. The divorce papers were crisp, printed on heavy cardstock that probably cost $3 a sheet. She'd already read them twice, every clause, every condition designed to ensure she left with exactly what David thought she deserved, which according to the document in front of her was approximately nothing. 0 alimony, no claim to his assets. Clean separation where she keeps her clothing and jewelry, while he retains everything else including the Buckhead condo they'd shared, the Tesla he'd purchased in his name, and the investment portfolio he'd built while she focused on her career at a nonprofit that paid $42,000 a year. His attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Wu, in a charcoal suit that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent would be after this, cleared her throat with the impatience of someone billing $600 an hour. "Mrs. Chen, we've structured these terms very fairly, given the circumstances. Both parties are young, no children. This can be handled amicably if everyone cooperates." Sarah looked at the attorney, then back at David. 8 years of marriage reduced to 12 pages of legal language that made their entire relationship sound like a failed business venture, being liquidated for parts. They'd met at a charity gala, one of those black tie affairs where Atlanta's young professionals gathered to network while pretending to care about whatever cause was printed on the program. David had made her laugh that night, told her she was the most genuine person in a room full of people performing authenticity, said he admired women who chose purpose over profit. He'd proposed 11 months later on a beach in Tybee Island, got down on one knee in the sand while the sun set behind him like something out of a movie. She'd said yes because he seemed different from the men who either fetishized her Asian American identity or ignored it completely, because he appeared to genuinely respect her work with underserved communities, because at 26 she'd been tired of dating men who saw her as either exotic or invisible. She'd kept her maiden name professionally, Sarah Mitchell at work and Sarah Chen in personal life, a compartmentalization that felt clean and practical at the time. She'd never mentioned her family's wealth, never brought her father to company events, never used his name to open doors or smooth paths. Her father, Robert Mitchell, was 64 years old and the founder of Mitchell Capital Group, a private equity firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. He'd built his fortune slowly and carefully over 3 decades, acquiring stakes in mid-sized companies with solid fundamentals and long-term growth potential. TechVantage, the company where both Sarah and David worked, had been one of those acquisitions back in 2018 when Mitchell Capital purchased 70% ownership. It was public record, filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, available to anyone who bothered to look. David had never bothered. Sarah walked into the boardroom, and the holiday party energy hit her like a wall of sound and expensive cologne. 200 employees packed into the hotel ballroom, white lights strung across the ceiling, evergreen garlands on every table, open bar doing heavy business. The smell of prime rib and corporate celebration thick in the air. She'd driven there alone, same as the last 6 holiday parties, telling herself it was practical because David's sales calls ran late and her marketing deadlines piled up. But the truth was heavier and harder to ignore. They'd stopped being a team somewhere around year 4, stopped having conversations that weren't about logistics or schedules, stopped touching each other except in the performative ways that maintained appearances at events like this. David was 39, vice president of sales at TechVantage, the kind of executive who walked into rooms and commanded attention without asking for it. He'd brought in $28 million in revenue over 4 years, crushed every quota, built a sales team that other companies tried to poach. Management loved him because he delivered results. His team feared him just enough to perform at peak levels, and his colleagues admired the ruthless efficiency with which he closed deals that other reps couldn't touch. Sarah was 34, director of marketing. She'd earned her MBA from Emory while working full-time, built campaigns that tripled qualified leads, mentored junior marketers who were mostly women navigating a male-dominated tech industry. Her team respected her quietly, the way women in corporate America learned to respect each other when the conference room was mostly men, and the credit for their work often went elsewhere. She found her marketing team near the back of the ballroom. They hugged her and asked about holiday plans, and she lied smoothly, said everything was fine, work was good, marriage was solid, all the polite fictions people told at corporate parties. At 9:20, David texted her, "Need to talk after my speech." She didn't respond, just felt her stomach drop because she recognized that tone even in text message form. The one he used right before delivering news he knew the other person wouldn't like. At 9:30, he took the microphone even though no one had asked him to speak. He just walked up to the front of the room and grabbed it like he owned not just the microphone, but the entire evening. Sarah's hands went cold, and she knew immediately that whatever came next would be bad. Before we toast to another record-breaking year, David's voice carried across the ballroom with the projection of someone who'd given hundreds of sales presentations. "I need my wife up here for a minute." 200 faces turned towards Sarah, and she felt the weight of every single gaze, felt her heart rate spike and her breathing shallow, and every instinct screamed at her to leave. But her feet carried her forward anyway because what else could she do in a room full of colleagues and witnesses? David held the microphone in one hand and a manila folder in the other. His expression was calm and pleasant, like he was about to announce a promotion instead of detonating her life in public. "Sarah," he said when she reached the front, "we both know this marriage hasn't been working for a while now. I think it's time we handled this honestly and transparently in front of everyone who knows us." The ballroom went silent, that heavy, suffocating silence where 200 people collectively held their breath. He opened the manila folder and pulled out papers she recognized immediately as divorce documents. "I'm not interested in a long, drawn-out legal battle," he continued. "So I had these drawn up with fair terms, no alimony, no shared assets. We both walk away with what we brought into this marriage and move forward as adults." He held out a pen to her, the same Mont Blanc he used to sign million-dollar contracts. Someone near the bar coughed nervously. A glass clinked against the table somewhere in the back, but no one spoke and no one moved. Sarah stared at the papers, at the pen, at David's face, which showed nothing except mild expectation, like he was waiting for her to approve a marketing budget, rather than sign away 8 years of marriage in front of their entire company. "You didn't marry me for money anyway, right, Sarah?" He said it like a question, but his tone made it a statement. Her throat tightened and she couldn't make words form, but her hand reached out and took the pen because what else was there to do except sign and leave and try to find some shred of dignity in a situation designed to strip her of exactly that? 3 loops of her signature, 1 straight line, done. She set the pen down on the table next to the microphone stand and turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on marble floor in a rhythm that sounded too loud and too steady for how she felt inside. Behind her, David's voice came through the speakers again. "See? Mutual decision, no drama. Just 2 adults being honest about what wasn't working." Someone laughed, nervous and uncomfortable. Someone else cleared their throat, but Sarah didn't look back and didn't stop walking until she pushed through the ballroom doors into the empty hallway beyond. The hallway was blessedly quiet and empty. She leaned against the wall and let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Her phone started buzzing immediately, texts flooding in from colleagues who had witnessed the spectacle. "OMG, are you okay? What just happened? Call me if you need anything. Holy shit, Sarah." She scrolled past them all and opened Instagram out of morbid curiosity, searched for the Tech Vantage Company hashtag and found 3 stories already posted. The first from Jennifer in marketing, shaky video with caption, "Did this really just happen?" Followed by shocked face emojis, view count already climbing past 5,000. The second from Mike in sales, better angle showing David's face clearly as he explained the terms, caption "wildest holiday party ever" with laughing emojis. The third from someone she didn't recognize, a close-up of Sarah's face as she signed, caption "when you know it's over" with a sad face emoji. She closed the app and opened her messages and scrolled to Dad, her thumb hovering over his name. Robert Mitchell, the man who'd taught her to build her own path without relying on his shadow, to prove herself on merit rather than connections, to keep her cards close and never show weakness in rooms full of people looking for it. She hadn't asked him for help since she was 19 years old and changed her last name back to Mitchell after her parents' divorce. Hadn't asked when she applied to grad school or started her career or married David. She'd wanted to prove she could do everything herself without the weight of her father's wealth making people question whether she'd earned it. But this felt different. This felt like something she couldn't handle alone. Not because she lacked strength, but because David had made it public and viral, and she needed someone in her corner who understood how power actually worked. She pressed call, and he answered on the first ring. Sarah. His voice was calm and steady like always. Dad, she said, and her voice cracked slightly. I need to tell you something. I already know, he replied. Someone sent me the video 30 minutes ago. Her stomach dropped. Who sent it? Doesn't matter, he said. What matters is what you want to do about it. She closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the wall. The hallway smelled like industrial cleaning solution and faint perfume from someone who'd passed through earlier. I don't know, she whispered. Sarah. His tone shifted slightly, softer but still firm. You've never asked me for anything, not once. In 15 years, you've built your entire career without using my name or my money, and I've respected that. But if you want to walk away from this, I'll support you completely. And if you want justice, I'll make sure you get it. She opened her eyes and stared at the recessed lighting in the ceiling. What would justice look like? He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then the truth comes out, and there are consequences for public humiliation. Sarah exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. Do what you need to do. Are you absolutely sure? He asked. She thought about David's face, about the way he'd handed her that pen like he was doing her a favor, about 8 years of small dismissive comments about her non-profit work being cute, and her salary being pocket change, and her choices being hobbies rather than career. Yes, she said, I'm sure. Good, her father said. Go home, don't respond to anyone, don't post anything on social media. I'll call you tomorrow morning. The line went dead, and Sarah pushed off the wall and walked to her car and drove to her apartment and sat in the dark living room without turning on lights. She didn't cry, not yet. Just sat there while her phone continued buzzing with notifications she didn't read. By 6 the next morning, the video had 200,000 views. By noon, it had passed 6 million. Sarah woke to her phone vibrating non-stop on the nightstand. She silenced everything, made coffee, stared out her apartment window at Atlanta's skyline, and tried to process what her life had become overnight. The comments section under the viral video was predictably terrible, split between people defending David and people defending her, and most just watching for entertainment. He's probably been supporting her for years and finally had enough. Modern women want equality until divorce time, then suddenly they need alimony. Something's off about how calm she is. Why would he do this in public unless she did something wrong? This is literally abuse, and everyone's treating it like entertainment. Sarah read a few dozen comments and then closed the app and didn't open it again. On December 23rd, David appeared on a podcast called Masculine Mindset, episode 212, hosted by Brett Morrison, who had 400,000 subscribers and made content about men reclaiming their power in relationships. Sarah didn't listen, but her friend Rachel sent her the transcript with a message saying, "You need to see this." The transcript was 8 pages of David explaining how he'd supported Sarah's career for 8 years while she worked at a nonprofit making barely enough to cover her own expenses, how he'd carried the financial weight of their marriage, how she'd started acting entitled and resentful of his success, how he'd decided to end things publicly to ensure there were witnesses and no way for her to claim coercion later. The host praised him for his transparency and his refusal to let women manipulate the system. The episode got shared 90,000 times in 24 hours. Sarah read 3 pages of the transcript and closed her laptop. On December 26th, the audit notice went out to TechVantage executives. She learned about it from her father, who called him at 7 in the morning, sounding more energized than she'd heard him in years. Mitchell Capital Group is exercising audit rights per the shareholder agreement, he told her. Forensic accounting team starts today, full scope review of executive expense reports and HR compliance files for the past 5 years. Sarah sat up in bed, her coffee forgotten on the nightstand. Dad, David's going to know this is because of me. Let him think that, Robert said calmly. Let him think you're vindictive and using family connections for revenge. The evidence will tell a different story. What evidence? Sarah asked. Your father was quiet for a moment, then said, Men like David don't just humiliate their wives in public, Sarah. That behavior comes from somewhere. It comes from years of getting away with smaller things. And companies that protect executives who bring in revenue tend to protect them from a lot more than bad behavior at holiday parties. The audit team was led by Patricia Foster, former FBI forensic accountant who now ran her own firm specializing in corporate fraud and employment law violations. She'd seen every version of executive misconduct in her 20-year career, and she approached audits with the systematic thoroughness of someone who knew that men who felt untouchable always left trails. They started with expense reports, 5 years of digital files and receipts, and corporate credit card statements for every executive at TechVantage. David's file was notably thick, and the first red flag appeared on day 2 of the audit. February 2020, line item labeled Client Dinner Business Development, amount $1,200, vendor listed as The Diamond Club, which was a gentleman's club in Buckhead. Patricia highlighted it and checked TechVantage company policy, section 4.7, which explicitly prohibited using corporate funds at adult entertainment venues. She kept reading and found 16 more similar charges over 4 years, all gentlemen's clubs, all marked as business development or client entertainment, total amount $31,000, all approved by David's supervisor Kenneth Harrington, who was also on the TechVantage board of directors. By day 4, Patricia's team had identified a pattern. Every expense that violated policy had been approved without question. David had essentially used the corporate card as his personal entertainment fund, and no one had stopped him because his sales numbers were too good to question. The HR files were worse. Amanda Torres, the HR director, delivered 3 boxes of complaint files, looking nervous and pale. These are the official complaints filed over the past 5 years, she said, redacted for privacy. Patricia didn't look up from her laptop. We need unredacted versions. Mitchell Capital has authority per the shareholder agreement. You have 90 minutes. Amanda's hands shook slightly as she left. She returned exactly 90 minutes later with unredacted files. Patricia opened the first box and pulled out David Chen's folder, which contained 9 formal complaints spanning 5 years. Complaint number 1 was dated October 2019 from Rachel Cooper, a sales associate who was African American. The allegation stated that Mr. Chen made repeated comments about my appearance and asked invasive questions about my dating life. When I asked him to stop, he told me I was being too sensitive and that I should be flattered by the attention. HR's response was a coaching conversation conducted. Employee expressed regret. No formal discipline warranted. 40 days later, David was promoted to senior sales manager. Complaint number 2 came in March 2020 from Angela Martinez, a Latina marketing coordinator. She alleged that Mr. Chen called me feisty and spicy in front of clients, made jokes about Hispanic women being hot-blooded, and when I objected, he laughed and said, everyone knows Latina women are passionate. He also asked if I got my job through a diversity program. HR's response was another coaching conversation. Employee acknowledged comments may have been misinterpreted. No formal discipline needed. 60 days later, David was promoted to sales director. Patricia read through 7 more complaints, all from women, 6 from women of color, all describing similar patterns of inappropriate comments about appearance, touching without consent, questions about whether they were diversity hires, jokes about ethnic stereotypes. Every single complaint resulted in a coaching conversation and no formal discipline. And in every single case, David received a promotion or significant bonus within 90 days of the complaint being filed. The pattern wasn't just clear, it was damning. HR hadn't failed to address the complaints. They'd actively protected David because he generated revenue that made the company's quarterly numbers look good. Patricia pulled email server backups, and recovered deleted threads that painted an even uglier picture. January 2022 email chain between David Chen and Kenneth Harrington, plus 2 other male VPs. Subject line was New Diversity Initiative. David's reply said, "Great, more quotas. Guess we're not hiring the best people anymore, just the most diverse ones." Kenneth responded with, "LOL, keep that between us." The thread continued for 23 pages with jokes about oppression Olympics and comments mocking unconscious bias training. At one point, David wrote, "Someone should tell HR that diversity isn't actually a qualification." Patricia added it to the evidence file and moved on to exit interviews. She found that 8 of the 9 women who'd filed complaints had left TechVantage within 18 months, 4 quit outright, 3 transferred to lower visibility roles. 1 was placed on a performance improvement plan and resigned rather than fight it. Patricia called 2 of the women who'd left. Both confirmed the same story. After they complained their managers started documenting every minor mistake, their performance reviews dropped without explanation. The workplace became hostile in ways that were hard to prove but impossible to ignore, so they left. One woman told Patricia over the phone that everyone knew if you complained about David Chen, your career was over because he brought in $30 million and you were replaceable. Patricia compiled everything into a 60-page audit report with exhibits and documentation and a clear conclusion. TechVantage had systematically protected David Chen despite 9 formal complaints. Because his revenue numbers outweighed their commitment to maintaining a safe workplace, they had violated their own policies, created a hostile work environment, and engaged in retaliation against women who reported misconduct. The report recommended immediate termination for cause, review of Amanda Torres and Kenneth Harrington's roles, comprehensive policy reform, and noted that the company faced significant liability, including potential class action lawsuits. Robert Mitchell read the report in 30 minutes and forwarded it to TechVantage's board of directors with a subject line that said, "Emergency meeting required. Board review of audit findings." The meeting was scheduled for January 3rd. David retained a law firm called Patterson and Associates, who specialized in aggressive executive defense. His lead attorney was Stuart Patterson, who had built a career defending high-performing executives accused of misconduct by arguing that ambitious, successful men were often targets of false allegations from disgruntled employees. The demand letter arrived on December 28th, 14 pages addressed to Mitchell Capital Group and TechVantage's board, alleging that the audit was retaliatory and orchestrated by David's ex-wife, using family connections to destroy his career and reputation. The letter claimed David was the victim of a coordinated harassment campaign, that the timing of the audit immediately following his divorce proved malicious intent, that his employment record was exemplary with $28 million in documented revenue and 0 upheld complaints. It demanded immediate cessation of the audit, threatened defamation lawsuits if findings were made public, and requested $500,000 for emotional distress and reputational harm. Sarah's attorney Sharon Wells read the letter to her over the phone. "This is standard intimidation tactics," she said. "They're hoping you'll back down because most people do and threaten with expensive litigation." Sarah was sitting in her apartment staring at the city lights. "What do we do?" "Nothing," Sharon said calmly. "We let the audit finish. We let the evidence speak. His lawyer can threaten whatever he wants, but the documentation is solid." But David didn't stop with legal threats. On January 2nd, an article appeared in Atlanta Business Journal, a local publication with regional credibility. The headline read, "Tech Executive Claims Audit is Ex-Wife's Revenge." The article was 900 words, citing anonymous sources who were clearly David's friends and colleagues. The piece painted him as an ambitious sales leader caught in a messy divorce, claimed Sarah had struggled in her role and resented his success, suggested she'd never mentioned her family's wealth during the marriage, then weaponized it when things ended. The article got shared 200,000 times in 36 hours, and the comments section exploded with people defending David and attacking Sarah without knowing any facts beyond what the article presented. Sarah's friends sent her the link, but she didn't read past the headline. She'd learned years ago that you couldn't control narratives once they went viral. You could only control your own actions and wait for truth to surface. On January 3rd, the Tech Vantage board met virtually. 12 people on a Zoom call, including Kenneth Harrington, who had mentored David for years, Amanda Torres, who looked terrified, Robert Mitchell, who sat silent with his camera on but microphone muted, Patricia Foster, who would present the audit findings, and 8 other board members with varying levels of awareness about what was coming. Kenneth spoke first, trying to get ahead of the narrative. Before we begin, I want to state clearly that this audit feels motivated by personal grievance. David Chen has been instrumental to this company's growth, $28 million in revenue over 4 years, consistently exceeding targets. The timing here raises serious questions about motive. Patricia's expression didn't change. She'd presented audit findings to hostile boards before and knew that facts eventually outweighed politics. The audit was initiated per standard shareholder oversight protocols, she said evenly. Mitchell Capital has exercised this right twice before, in 2016 and 2019 without controversy. The scope covered all executive expenses and HR compliance. Mr. Chen's name appeared in the findings because the evidence led there. We didn't target him specifically. Kenneth wasn't satisfied, but those previous audits didn't result in termination recommendations, because those previous audits didn't uncover systematic policy violations and a pattern of protected misconduct, Patricia replied. Then she presented for 40 minutes, walking through expense fraud, the 9 HR complaints, the promotion timeline, the email evidence, the exit interviews. Her tone never changed, just methodical presentation of facts, with supporting documentation for every claim. When she finished, the Zoom call was silent for almost 10 seconds. Then one of the female board members spoke. 9 complaints over 5 years, and the response was coaching conversations. That's not accountability, that's enabling. Kenneth tried to defend the decisions. Those complaints were handled appropriately at the time. Coaching is a valid intervention strategy. We balanced accountability with business performance. Another board member cut him off. You balanced protecting a revenue generator with protecting your employees, and you chose revenue. That's not balance, that's negligence, and it exposes this company to massive liability. Amanda Torres tried to explain that they'd followed standard protocols, but her voice shook, and she clearly knew her position was indefensible. Patricia responded without emotion. Your protocols violated your own written policies and federal employment law. You documented complaints, then took no meaningful action. That's not protocol, that's a systematic failure. The Tech Vantage CEO, who was relatively new and clearly uncomfortable, asked what the recommendation was. Immediate termination for cause, Patricia said. No severance per company policy regarding gross misconduct, and formal review of HR leadership and anyone who approved the pattern of protection. Kenneth objected strenuously. This is excessive. You're destroying a man's career over some off-color jokes and personality conflicts. The female board member who'd spoken earlier said sharply, 9 women filed formal complaints. 8 of them were women of color. This isn't personality conflict. This is discrimination and harassment. And if even one of those women files a lawsuit, we'll lose, because discovery will expose everything we're discussing right now. The meeting ended without immediate resolution, further review needed, but the writing was on the wall and Kenneth knew it. He texted David afterward. This is worse than I thought. The evidence is substantial. I'll do what I can, but prepare yourself. David didn't respond, just sat in his condo, staring at his phone and feeling the ground shift beneath 8 years of believing he was untouchable. On January 4th, Sarah met with Rachel Cooper at a coffee shop in Virginia Highland. Small place with good espresso and enough distance from Tech Vantage's offices that they wouldn't run into colleagues. Rachel had reached out via Instagram DM saying, I need to talk to you about David. It's important. Rachel was 28, African American. She'd worked at Tech Vantage for 3 years before leaving in 2020. She looked tired in the way that doesn't go away with sleep. Sarah ordered coffee neither of them would drink and waited. I saw the video, Rachel said quietly, of what he did to you at the holiday party. And I need to tell you, he did similar things to me, different versions, but the same cruelty. Sarah listened as Rachel's story came out slowly. She'd been a promising sales associate, Good numbers, well-liked by clients. Then David became her manager and started making comments about her appearance, asking invasive questions about her dating life, touching her lower back when he passed her desk. She'd filed a complaint in October 2019. HR had called her in, and she described everything in detail. They took notes and said they'd handle it. 2 weeks later, David got a coaching conversation where he apologized and claimed it was a misunderstanding. 1 month later, he was promoted. Rachel kept working but avoided him when possible. Then in early 2020, he cornered her in the break room and asked why she was still being cold to him. She said she was uncomfortable with his previous behavior. He told her she was holding a grudge and being unprofessional. Her next performance review dropped from exceeds expectations to meets expectations with no explanation. She filed another complaint. HR said they'd already investigated and found no wrongdoing, suggested she focus on professional development. 3 months later, she quit, took a job in retail, making half her TechVantage salary, moved back in with her parents. I thought I was the problem, Rachel said, her voice cracking. I thought maybe I was too sensitive or I'd misunderstood, but when I saw what he did to you, I realized he does this to women who he thinks can't fight back, especially women of color. Sarah's throat was tight. How many others do you think there are? Rachel pulled out her phone. I've been in touch with 4 other women since the video went viral. They all have similar stories. Over the next week, 5 more women contacted Sarah, all former TechVantage employees, all with complaints about David that had been buried by HR. Angela Martinez, who'd been called spicy and asked if she was a diversity hire. Keisha Thompson, who'd been told she was articulate for a black woman. 3 others with variations on the same theme. Inappropriate comments, retaliation after complaining, careers derailed or ended. Sarah compiled their stories and contacted Sharon Wells, who brought them all together for a meeting in her law office downtown. Sharon addressed the group of 6 women with clear-eyed honesty. What I'm asking you to do requires courage and comes with risk. Your names may become public. David's attorneys will try to discredit you. Social media will be brutal. You need to understand that before we proceed. Rachel spoke first. I already lost my career and my confidence. What else can he take from me? Angela nodded. I've stayed quiet for 4 years watching him get promoted while I got sidelined. I'm done being quiet. Keisha said if we don't stop him, he'll do this to the next woman who thinks she has no power. The others agreed, and Sharon distributed affidavit forms. These are sworn legal statements. You'll describe what happened in detail, dates, witnesses, what you told HR, what they did or didn't do. You'll sign under penalty of perjury. One woman hesitated. What if they don't believe us? They will, Sharon said firmly, because you're not alone. 6 of you with the same pattern? That's not coincidence, that's evidence. All 6 women signed. Their statements ran to 40 pages of detailed accounts. Rachel included email screenshots. Angela had her performance reviews showing the drop after she complained. Keisha had saved text messages from David that were inappropriate. Sharon sent copies to Robert Mitchell, to TechVantage's board, to Patricia Foster, who added them to the audit evidence file. On January 8th, an employee survey leaked to the press. Someone anonymously sent it to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which was a credible outlet with real investigative journalism standards. The survey had been conducted by TechVantage in November before the holiday party, before the scandal, asking employees about workplace culture. The results were damning. 76% said leadership protected high performers over company culture. 38% of women reported the workplace wasn't inclusive. 59% were aware of complaints being dismissed without meaningful action. The free text comments were even worse. One said, "This is a boys' club, and if you're not a white man in sales, good luck." Another said, "I've watched women quit after complaining and nothing ever changes." A third said HR protects people who make money, not people who get hurt by them. The article ran with the headline, "Tech firm's internal survey reveals culture crisis," and didn't name David specifically, but the timing made the connection obvious. The response on social media shifted slightly. More people questioning the initial narrative, more women sharing their own experiences with similar situations. A hashtag started trending, "Not just one man," referring to the pattern of corporate protection for executives who brought in revenue. David tried to control the narrative by posting on LinkedIn about his commitment to diversity and inclusion. The post got ratioed immediately, with hundreds of comments from people pointing out the audit findings and the leaked survey and the growing number of women speaking out. He deleted the post after 6 hours, but screenshots had already spread everywhere. On January 10th, TechVantage's board met again. This time the vote was swift. 8 members voted to terminate David Chen for cause, effective immediately. 2 abstained, including Kenneth, who knew his own position was now under review. 1 voted against, but didn't give a reason. David's severance was 0. Termination for gross misconduct per company policy meant he forfeited his stock options and his bonus, and left with nothing except his base salary through his last day of employment. The official statement said TechVantage takes all allegations of misconduct seriously, and after thorough investigation, we have concluded that Mr. Chen's behavior violated company policies. In our commitment to maintaining a safe, inclusive workplace, his employment has been terminated effective January 10th. David threatened to sue for wrongful termination, but his attorney advised against it. The evidence was overwhelming, and litigation would only make everything public in ways that would destroy whatever reputation he had left. He updated his LinkedIn to open to new opportunities and started applying to competitor firms, but recruiters ghosted him. The story had spread through Atlanta's tech industry, and no one wanted to touch someone with that much documented baggage. 6 months later, David was still unemployed, living off savings, watching his career evaporate because he believed his sales numbers made him untouchable. Sarah stayed at her nonprofit initially, but then something unexpected happened. TechVantage offered her a position as chief marketing officer, with a substantial salary increase and equity package. The new CEO, who'd been brought in after the scandal, wanted to demonstrate commitment to culture change and thought hiring Sarah sent the right message. She considered it for 2 weeks, then declined, told them she appreciated the offer but didn't want to build her career at a company where she'd always be known as the woman whose ex-husband got fired. She wanted something clean and separate. Instead, she accepted a CMO role at a different Atlanta tech company, smaller but growing fast, with a CEO who knew her story and hired her anyway, saying, "Your resilience is exactly what we need here." She kept the name Sarah Mitchell professionally, never hid her connection to Mitchell Capital, but never led with it either. Let her work speak for itself. 3 women were promoted under her leadership in the first 6 months. She mentored junior marketers, pushed for transparent pay equity, and helped implement HR policies that actually held people accountable, regardless of their revenue numbers. One evening, about a year after the divorce, she was organizing a fundraiser for her old nonprofit, the one that paid $42,000 a year and served underprivileged communities. She'd stayed on their board and still volunteered regularly. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "This is Rachel Cooper. I wanted you to know I just accepted a position as a sales manager at a tech company in Austin. Better pay than TechVantage ever gave me. They knew about the complaints and hired me anyway because they said anyone who has the courage to speak up about misconduct is exactly who they want in leadership. Thank you for believing us when no one else did." Sarah typed back, "Congratulations, you earned this." But she knew Rachel had earned it years ago and had only been held back by a system that valued David's revenue over her dignity. 2 years after the divorce, Sarah was invited to speak at a Women in Tech conference in San Francisco. 3,000 attendees, corporate executives and entrepreneurs, and students all trying to navigate industries that still struggled with inclusion despite decades of policies and initiatives. She stood at the podium looking at faces that reflected versions of her own journey and told them about the holiday party, about keeping her family wealth hidden to prove she could succeed on merit, about learning that proving yourself to people who would never see you was a losing game. She told them about Rachel and Angela and Keisha and the other women who'd found their voices when someone finally listened, about how change happened through small, persistent actions, and refusing to accept that things had to stay broken just because they had always been that way. The applause was sustained and genuine. During Q&A, someone asked, "Do you regret the marriage now that you know how it ended?" Sarah thought about it honestly. "No," she said finally. "I regret not seeing clearly sooner, but the marriage taught me what I didn't want, and sometimes knowing what you don't want is as valuable as knowing what you do. It taught me that my worth isn't dependent on someone else recognizing it. That power isn't always loud and obvious. Sometimes it's quiet and patient and shows up when it's needed most. Another person asked what she'd say to women in similar situations who felt powerless. Sarah leaned into the microphone. You're never as powerless as you think. Even when systems are designed to keep you small, you have more power than you know. The question is whether you'll use it, and whether you'll use it to help others climb too. After the conference, she had dinner with her father and Sharon Wells, who'd flown out for the event. They talked about the foundation Sarah had started using part of her trust fund inheritance, focused on supporting women facing workplace harassment with legal resources and financial assistance during transitions. The foundation had helped 30 women in its first year, connected them with attorneys, covered their expenses while they looked for new jobs, provided counseling services. It wasn't solving systemic problems, but it was helping individuals navigate them. Robert was quieter than usual during dinner. Finally, he said, I need to tell you something. I'm stepping back from day-to-day operations at Mitchell Capital, transitioning to an advisory role. The board wants fresh leadership for the next phase. Sarah felt her stomach drop. You built that company. I built it, he said. But it needs someone with vision for where the world is going, not where it's been. Someone who understands that business success isn't just about returns, but about impact. Someone who knows how to use power responsibly. He paused and looked at her directly. They want you, Sarah. She stared at him. I run a nonprofit and a foundation. I don't have private equity experience. You have something better, he said. You have integrity and vision and courage to make hard choices. We can teach you financial modeling and deal structure. We can't teach character. Sharon was smiling like she'd known this was coming. Sarah looked between them. Can I think about it? Of course, Robert said. But remember what your grandmother used to say. The biggest risk isn't failure. It's never trying because you're afraid of failing. Sarah remembered. Her grandmother had said that decades ago when everyone told her women couldn't run investment firms, when banks wouldn't take her seriously and clients doubted her competence. She tried anyway and built something that lasted. Maybe that was the real inheritance, not the money or the company shares, but the example, the proof that you could build something meaningful despite the obstacles. That night, Sarah stood on her apartment balcony, looking at San Francisco's lights stretching toward the bay. She thought about the woman she'd been 8 years ago, marrying someone who seemed safe, hiding her wealth to prove she was enough on her own terms. She thought about sitting in that boardroom, signing divorce papers while discovering her own strength. About Rachel working retail after her career was derailed. About all the women who'd stayed quiet because speaking up cost too much. She thought about her grandmother building companies when the world said women belonged in different rooms. About her father respecting her choice to forge her own path, even when he could have opened every door. She thought about the question from the conference, do you regret it? And she realized the answer was more complicated than yes or no. She regretted the pain, but not the lessons. Regretted the time lost, but not the clarity gained. Regretted that the system was broken, but not that she'd finally learned how to navigate it and help others do the same. She pulled out her phone and texted her father. Let's talk details about Mitchell Capital. I want to understand what you're proposing before I decide. His response came immediately. I'm proud of you, Sarah. I've always been proud of you. This isn't about the company needing you. It's about you being ready for what comes next. She smiled at her phone, thought about everything that had led to this moment. The marriage that ended badly, the public humiliation that went viral, the audit that exposed patterns, the women who found courage to speak, the foundation that grew from wanting to help others, avoid what she'd experienced. Maybe the divorce had ended her marriage, but it had started everything else. Had forced her to stop hiding and start claiming space. Stop proving herself to people who would never see her, and start building things that mattered. She went inside and opened her laptop and started drafting her response to the Mitchell Capital Board. Not an acceptance yet, but questions about vision and strategy and what kind of leader they actually needed. Because if she was going to do this, she needed to do it right. Needed to build something that reflected her values, not just her name. The work would be complicated and difficult, and full of moments where she'd doubt herself. But Sarah had learned that the most important things usually were. That courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward, despite it. That power wasn't something you were born with. but something you claimed carefully and deliberately with full awareness of the responsibility it carried. She wrote until midnight, stopped and saved the draft, and closed her laptop. Tomorrow she'd finish it and send it and start the next chapter, but tonight she'd just sat in the quiet of her apartment, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but peace. The kind that comes from knowing who you are and what you're capable of, and refusing to let anyone make you smaller than that. Some bridges burn themselves, and that's okay. Some endings are actually beginnings. Some divorces free you to become who you were always meant to be. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who decides how the story ends.